Welcome to my home office where I'm wearing a hoodie with a stain from olive oil, I think, when I was cooking. Anyway, I was thinking basically that it was a little bit silly to introduce the idea of the annotated bibliography assignment without really explaining why we were investigating certain things and kind of how all of that culminates together. So, I'm creating this video for you to watch the night before, maybe the morning of, class on Wednesday, being tomorrow, 10/4/2017. And my hope is that I'll introduce the topic of the final paper and it'll make a little bit more sense as to the topics that you're going to investigate, the keywords, the articles that you're going to look at for the annotated bibliography assignment. Okay, so the first thing I'm introducing is the third and final assignment, and then I'll kind of supplement and explain how the annotated bibliography fits into the grand scheme of it all. Okay, and I have like glasses flare from the monitor. Anyway, so we're just gonna hop into it. If you're screaming in the background, that's my son. Yep. Okay, look, it's little me and a big untitled document with two boxes. But I thought for illustrative purposes it was important. Okay, so the final assignment is called the feature design assignment. And the basic idea, since this is a communicating and dating class, is that there are a bunch of new technologies and things that exist in the universe that allow people to date. Okay, so where does this class fall into all of that? Well, we're learning a lot about the kind of theoretical backgrounds and ideas of dating and how people date and how people manage different communication patterns, right? So my idea for the final assignment was called a feature design. And essentially what you would be doing, and you can still do this, what you would be doing is you would be creating and proposing a design for a pre-existing application. So in short, you would be based on literature, based on a concept or theory or idea that we talked about in class. You would be proposing a pitch to be added to the app of Tinder or Match or Bumble or any of the other dating apps or services that exist out there. So that is sort of the first idea. That's the idea that appears on the syllabus. And for some people, that's going to be very interesting and useful. You go, okay, so Tinder's a thing. I'm going to add this component to Tinder and make it a better application and a better experience for the users. Okay, so that's avenue one, and I'm fine with either avenue, just as a preface to all this. The second idea is to create some sort of application that, of course, has to do with communicating and dating. And this application would be either a mirror or a reskin version of Tinder, or it could be something that's very unique. And so, what I want to do is I want to kind of off the top of my head propose kind of an example of approach number one and an example of approach number two and what those might look like. Okay, so for approach number one, the feature design, let's say, for instance, let's say that you are really, really interested in how communication privacy management looks and feels and functions based on whatever criteria. For whatever reason, CPM by Petronio really stood out to you. Well, if you take approach number one for communication privacy management theory, let's say you apply basic CPM rules to a pre-existing platform like Instagram. Now, Instagram, like Facebook and Twitter, has a bunch of different approaches and privacy settings that make your content visible and viewable and commentable by X number of people. Essentially, what's happening now with modern technology is that we have the affordance to be able to say, okay, Dean is able to see these three things when I post it, and Dean is able to see these four things, and Eli is able to see this, and so on and so forth. So your feature design would be to integrate some of the features of communication privacy management theory. And within that, what you could maybe argue or articulate is that a feature that Instagram should add are what we'll call, and we'll use the language of CPM, we'll call boundaries. And basically the boundaries tab, the boundaries component will be under the privacy tab. And essentially what you'll do is you'll say, okay, so when I post content about X and Y and Z, it's viewable to the entire public. But using that same account, if I post something and I want to establish boundaries and I want to only share that information with X, Y, and Z, all of a sudden those people now are able to view it. So let me give you kind of a parallel with this. On Facebook, I have people that are friends of mine, and then I have people who I'm Well, essentially, I have friends on Facebook, right? Some of those people I've tagged as being quote unquote friends. And essentially, what happens is when I make a status update, those people aren't able to see the content that I post. Well, Instagram doesn't have that, right? Instead, what Instagram has is if you're friends with the person, if they have a protected account, anything you post is now viewable. So, if we apply this boundaries feature, this feature design, what we would do is we would basically kind of emulate the Facebook component and make it happen. So essentially what we'd be doing is kind of stealing an idea, which is okay. It's just a slight tweak and innovation from it. And what we do with that idea, in short, is basically articulate and argue based on communication privacy management why this would be a good addition to a platform like Instagram. We could talk about the fuzzy boundaries and how certain people kind of expect and anticipate certain things. We talk about privacy control. I, as the owner of information, when I establish these boundaries and I say these three people can view these posts that meet those boundary criteria, basically what I'm doing is I'm enacting privacy control. I'm allowing them to be authorized co-owners of information, and then everybody else is not able to do that. So that might be an example of something that you would want to do with approach number one. Just take a pre-existing platform, Instagram, Snapchat, Tinder, Bumble, whatever, and add a feature based on a theory or idea that we talked about. And the list goes on and on and on. Communication privacy management theory, self-disclosure. We could talk about things like social penetration theory or social exchange theory. So in my experience, reading papers like this, starting with a theory, something that really interests you, and then kind of inductively thinking about, well, what would that look like on a platform might be helpful, or you could reverse engineer that, think about a feature that should exist, and then think to yourself, well, what theory kind of backs up or introduces that? Okay. I don't know why I have me on the small screen in this big thing. I should reverse it. But we're this far. We're like 7 minutes in. Okay. Wrap it up. Second approach for the final assignment. Instead of creating a feature to add to an existing platform, you would create an app. You would create a website. You would create something. And that something would, again, very much like the first approach, would take a core idea from the class or a theory and apply it. So since this is a communicating and dating class, wouldn't it be neat if there was a phone application based on not just relational turbulence, not necessarily relational dialectics theory, although you can create that, but what if there was a really cool application developed for turning points and turning points analysis? And basically what the app would include, and again, this is the second approach, you're developing this app. You're not actually developing it for the class. You're kind of proposing what it would look like, how it would function, why it would be that way. It would basically be an app where you pair up or you link up with perhaps platonic friends or even romantic partners. You decide. And essentially what happens is that each time you have what we would constitute as a turning point, positive, negative, or neutral, you would log it into the phone, and that individual would be alerted. So you and your romantic partner, you've been dating for a couple of months, you go on your first date and you have your first kiss. If you're paired in this application, you or the partner would log and say, okay, first kiss, boom. And now you would see basically a scatter plot graph that's like very first instance, boom. And then you and your partner individually, and maybe you could share it if you want it to be visible by the other person, you would rate your high and low commitment. So all of a sudden, first kiss, I would imagine you start to spike. You see an increase in commitment. And then your first fight, and so on and so forth. And then you see decreases and increases and peaks and valleys and all that kind of stuff. So that would be an example of a completely novel, unique application that you would develop. You might be thinking, well, why would I want them to see all these turning points? What if I want to have some of those turning points secretive? That could be your argument, as long as you're using the basic literature and ideas that we're talking about. Okay, so you take approach number one, approach number two. I am perfectly content with either, just as long as you know which route you're going. So how does this tie into the second assignment? Well, once you start thinking about a theory or a feature or a full application, you need to be able to justify that with literature. And that's where the annotated bibliography comes in. Say, for instance, and this can of course change before the end of the quarter, say, for instance, you're really interested in communication privacy management. You really want to know how couples, how romantic partners use communication privacy management, how they manage their boundaries, how they establish the rules. You're really interested in how that impacts people who are in homosexual relationships. Well, chances are You could find a reasonable amount of literature on CPM as it pertains to romantic relationships, but you might not, outside of the Miller article. Outside of the Lanuti article, you might not be able to understand how communication privacy management applies to that group of people. So essentially, the application development, the annotated bibliography assignment is your first foray into all those articles, all the things. So what I would do if I was you is start kind of with a third assignment, think about a feature, think about a full application, or think about a theory or a concept that you really, really like, and then backtrack. Once you really solidify, okay, I really like social penetration theory, which we'll talk about tomorrow, but I really like social penetration theory. Okay, so start doing your annotated bibliography with the keyword of social penetration theory and see maybe what jumps out at you. And you'll pick a couple of articles that slowly coalesce to be that literature review that you'll use in that final assignment. So hopefully this adds some layer of clarity. I apologize if at any point it was more or less confusing than before. But of course, I record this and I send it out to you at probably 8 or 9 p.m. whenever it goes up, with the hope that tomorrow, being Wednesday, I can answer any and all questions that you might have. Obviously, with the contingency that you will have viewed this video. Have a good night. See you then.